Okay. Oh,
Yep.
okay.
So Sherry is our Bereavement Coordinator.
I'm also a clinical pastoral chaplain at our hospital. So I do Rosvita and Joseph, part of our team as well. So it's nice to see familiar faces. But thank you again, everyone, for having us here tonight. This is very important for our community to talk about these things and experience this. Tonight, I'm hoping everyone has a little packet of paper. There should be 4 pieces of paper, a blue, yellow, orange and green, I think.
Raise your hand if you didn't get it.
Yeah, if you don't
Everybody's
have
got
one, let
one?
us know.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Do you have a pen?
So this exercise we're going to be doing, we've been doing for years with groups that we meet with, and it mirrors what a caregiver will experience through time of caring for someone, especially when it comes to the the person at some point knowing that they're not going to be with us forever. So it's a little difficult, I will say, and but we will do a little exercise when we're done, just to kind of relieve any energies that are hanging out. So I will end up letting you know which paper we're going to write on first, and then we'll go from there. Okay, does everyone have a pen and 4 pieces of paper, right? Different colors.
3 and 2 are the same.
Oh, dear.
Should have, yes, thank you.
Oh, you do? Okay, you should be
You're
okay
good,
there.
Rosita. Yeah, you're
Okay.
good. Everybody have something to write on as well. Okay. So I'd like you to take your blue piece of paper and write down the name of someone who is most dear to you. And folks, remember, there's no right or wrong here. Just whoever comes to mind, could be anybody. So now on the orange piece of paper, write down the activity you most enjoy doing with that person.
Second most is okay.
Now I want you to imagine something rather difficult. I want you to imagine this person who is dearest to you begins complaining about some back pain. You don't give it much thought at first, but it doesn't go away. So encourage them, your loved one, to go see the doctor. The doctor, they do lots of tests and unexpectedly discover a tumor on the spine. The test also reveals that it's cancer, and this cancer is aggressive. And because it is all wrapped around the spine, it is inoperable and untreatable. You're both in shock. You never anticipated such news. You never imagined this. Together, you decide to bring your loved one home. You leave the hospital, bring your loved one home so you can care for them. The condition gradually gets worse, and depression sets in for the loved one who is sick. You see a loss of ability and interest in doing things, and even those things you most enjoy doing together. Now, tear up the activity you most enjoy doing together. We'll tear up that orange piece of paper. You continue to care for your loved one as weeks, then months go by. You find that you start adjusting to this new life and to your new role as a caregiver. The caregiver becomes a familiar, sometimes even satisfying routine. Now take the yellow piece of paper and write down what has become most rewarding for you about being a caregiver for the person you hold so dear and love. Write down what's most rewarding to you about caring for that loved one. As a caregiver, you find that you still look forward to being able to do some things together. Even though you know your loved one has a terminal illness, and even though they are weaker and less interested than they used to be, you both enjoy being together and sharing some time together, doing things. Now, take the purple paper and write down what you still look forward to doing together. Are we all set to go? Okay. So the illness progresses even more quickly now than you thought it would. Your loved one sleeps a lot and is confused and disoriented when awake. You can no longer do even those little things you were looking forward to doing together. Now, take the purple paper, the things you were still looking forward to doing together, and tear that up. The decline continues. Your loved one grows weaker each day, becomes unresponsive, and finally slips into a coma. You continue to take care and sit with your loved one. The next week, your loved one dies. Now, tear up the first piece of paper, the blue one, the one bearing the name of the one who's most dear to you. After they are gone, you have time to reflect on your role as a caregiver, what it gave to you and what it meant to you as you took care of this person you loved so dearly. You loved them for so many years and cared for them for all those long months that you had together. Now, take the last paper in front of you, the yellow one, which describes what was most rewarding for you as her caregiver, and quietly tear that paper up. This is for some very difficult exercise to do because it puts us into that mindset. And I invite you all right now, just let's take like 3 deep breaths, and you just blow out any negative energies that might come through. So it's a lot, even to think about. This was only a few-minute exercise, and the feelings that maybe came to you just doing this exercise in a matter of maybe 7 minutes. Imagine caring for someone for a prolonged period of time, through their illness, through the process, through their dying process, and then not having them with us anymore. It's exhausting, mentally, physically exhausting. And that's why we're here tonight, to be here to talk about caring, self-care for the caregiver, because it's so important that we need to learn how to balance if this time does come, and balance life and what it is that probably one of the most difficult parts in our life, difficult events that could ever imagine. Is everyone okay right now? I want to make sure before we go on. Yes? Okay. All right. So the objective tonight is to understand the impact of caregivers, to recognize when you need support and where to find it, to create a safe environment. Continuing objectives are understand anticipatory grief, understand the dying process and bereavement, and help support yourself or the caregivers in your life. So hopefully we have a great event for you tonight, a great program, and Sue is going to take it from here.
Thank you. And I have a bag I'm just going to pass around so that you can
We'll grab our
get rid of
papers.
your- So as Sherry said, we're here today to talk about being a caregiver. And what we're talking about really is mostly being a family caregiver or a caregiver for someone whom you really love. Some of you might also be in the role professionally of being a caregiver. But today we're going to focus a lot on the emotional impact of being a caregiver for somebody who means a lot to us. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about how to create an environment that tries to avoid the pitfalls of being a caregiver and being able to prevent burnout or not being able to be there for the patient because you don't have anything left in your own reserve. So caregiving is a challenge, and sometimes it's a challenge to honor someone's wishes if they really would like to be able to stay home in their illness. And so we're going to talk about that today, and we're going to talk about how being a caregiver is about love. It's not about perfection, and being kind to yourself and making sure that you cut yourself a little bit of slack as you're taking care of someone else. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. So let's say, do you remember the old days when you wanted to get a job, you would open up the newspaper and look at the classified section and look at the help wanted ads? So imagine that you're looking at those help wanted ads and you see this job advertised where you have to be a scheduler, a chauffeur, you have to be able to prepare food, you have to be able to go out and shop for the ingredients before you prepare that food. You have to be a cleaner, you have to know how to medicate someone, and that's all the different routes of medication that you would have to administer medications, and keeping the schedule straight, keeping the medications straight, even though they're changing every time you go to the doctors or the hospital or something like that. And then also kind of being a therapist and an advocate for someone too. What if there was a job that encompassed all of those aspects of care? Would you want that job? How much do you think you should get paid for a job like that? That's a tough job. Now imagine if the job is that it's around the clock every day. Not too many people would be signing up for that position. These statistics on caregiving come from that book that we were telling you about, Beginner's Guide to the End by B.J. Miller and I'm sorry, what's the woman's name?
Shoshana Berger.
Berger, yeah. B.J. Miller and Shoshana Berger. I love this book. It's very, written in very down-to-earth language, and it's been helpful to me in myriad ways. This book talks about the burden of caregiving, the caregiver burden in America right now. And these statistics are actually a few years old. I did look at an AARP article that came out in 2020 that where these statistics were updated. But 40 million plus caregivers in the United States are unpaid, family caregivers. That's an estimate, of course. If you're a registered nurse, we know how many registered nurses there are out there because you got to register. But if you're a caregiver, you don't sign up, you don't have to report, your role or anything like that. So it's an estimate, but we estimate that there's, the powers that be estimate that there are more than 40 million family caregivers in the United States. That represents about a 33% loss of income to the gross national product. If those people who are caregiving were paid for their efforts, that it would enhance the gross national product by 33%. That's a lot. And then about 11% of those caregivers quit their job to provide care. Those are the people who are usually needing to be there around the clock. But then there's also the people who are trying to juggle a career or other obligations and being a caregiver as well. And the estimate is that people who are family caregivers usually end up spending about $10,000 on average out of pocket for the incidentals that are required to be that caregiver. So not only are you not getting paid for it, but it's also affecting your bottom line in spending. There's a lot of emotions involved in caregiving. Of course, there's love. Love is usually what underlies the will to want to care for someone at home or be their primary caregiver. And when I say at home, I also am including somebody who lives in a skilled nursing facility, because a lot of times those caregivers are spending the days with them to make sure that they get fed, to kind of oversee their, they have oversight, professional oversight, but we all know that when the caregivers are there, people, get that little bit of extra attention that they need sometimes. So in a nursing home, even an assisted living facility where you're going to constantly running back and forth, I count that as a caregiver situation as well. A lot of times people have guilt being a caregiver. People love to judge other people by whether or not they're doing things right? Like if you go on social media, there's always people saying, oh, I saw this mother at the playground and she was doing this, and what kind of mother would let their child do that? And the same goes for caregiving. A lot of people have a lot of advice for you when you're a caregiver, and they don't know your loved one, and every loved one is different. Next week when we talk about patients with dementia, we're going to go into that a little bit as well. But there's always, when people are always telling you how you should be doing things, it makes you feel like you're not measuring up a lot of times. So there's the guilt of that. Then sometimes there's resentment, because when you are a family caregiver, there's an opportunity cost for the time that you are spending taking care of your loved one. And maybe you see people in your peer group, other retirees and things like that, who are going on trips, who play bridge a couple of times a week, or get to go out to restaurants, or do all the things that that you would really like to be doing in your retirement as well, and instead you've got these other obligations. For that reason, and for many others, you feel sorrow, and we're going to talk a little bit about anticipatory grief and what you might be going through as a caregiver in terms of this loss that you're observing day to day. And then you might also feel fearful. You don't know what to expect yet. You don't know how long this is going to go on. You don't know how much harder it's going to get for you. And then it comes back to love, because love is often the touchstone, the thing that keeps us rooted in that commitment, and the thing that gets us to keep going, even though we're having all those other emotions. And we might be having them all within a day, maybe sometimes all at the same time. Difficulties in caregiving when you become a caregiver. First of all, of course, there's the shift in roles. What we mean by that is if you're caring for your spouse, sometimes you're going to feel like your spouse's parent instead of their mate. Sometimes we see mothers or fathers who are caring for a child who's ill. Sometimes we see children having to grow up too fast. A lot of times it really changes the family dynamics and what people's relationship is with one another. It also affects our other relationships besides the one that we have with the patient or the person who needs caring. If you are caring for a parent, you still have a marriage that you might want to make sure that you're involved in. And so there's all kinds of shifts in personal dynamics that way. You find a lot of times diminished connections, and I've talked about this in a couple of the others, and I'll talk about it again next week, that a lot of times if you're caring for someone who's very ill or dying, that person's world tends to get very small, meaning that they don't have as much energy for other people. Maybe they don't have the ability to socialize and things like that. If you are the caregiver who's tied to that patient, attached to that patient, then your world, by definition, also gets smaller. You can't go out with a couple anymore, or you can't, maintain your friendships that you have because you're taking care of your mother around the clock or something like that. And then people feel burned out. And I know that burnout is a concept that we hear all the time. I'm sure, during the COVID coverage and everything like that, we heard about the big quit, where a lot of people decided not to go back to work because they were burnt out, or healthcare professionals were getting burnt out. But when we talk about burnout, what are we really talking about?
So if you mind me just mentioning
Sure.
something. You know what? We hope that we have friends and family that can support us, even if they're not living at a home with the patient. But don't be afraid to ask for help. I think, even I was talking about this when we were putting this program together, having a calendar, knowing that, you go to church on Sunday or Saturday night or whatever Mass is or service. If you keep that in your schedule, see if somebody can help you. A friend could come over and stay for an hour and a half. It's not a lot to ask, but don't feel that you can't be able to ask that. Make sure that you can do this for yourself, because if you start to deplete your resources and get burnt out, that doesn't help the situation. So ask for help. And if there's maybe a night that, I just want to go out for dinner, call family and set it out for 3 weeks away, and be mindful that it could change. Always be ready for, schedule to change, but maybe have a calendar of things that you can also look forward to doing. Not just, okay, I'm here and this is it. You need to take care of yourself too. That's why we're here tonight, to talk about self-care.
So what if you are the family caregiver and you're wondering if maybe you're experiencing this concept of burnout? How do you know that you're feeling burned out? First of all, you lose pleasure in the things that always brought you joy. I know that when I get home from work after a hard day, I love to sit down and do a jigsaw puzzle. But I've heard people who, look forward to doing like simple things like that in their quiet time. When they're a caregiver, they feel like they have almost too much time, and their time keeps getting interrupted, and so they can't even take pleasure in something like that. Sometimes food doesn't taste good. Some people lose weight when they're a family caregiver because they just don't have the appetite. They don't feel like cooking, and so they don't prepare the kinds of foods that they really like to do. So if you're not engaging in the things that always brought you joy, that may be a sign. If you're getting feedback from friends, if you have honest friends, sometimes people feel insulted, but if they're well-meaning, or even if they're not so well-meaning, maybe they're a little passive-aggressive, but if they're telling you that they're noticing something, think about it. Think about whether there might be some grain of truth to what they're noticing. Likewise, with your colleagues, if they're noticing that you're maybe not as good at doing certain things as you used to be, that that may be a sign that you're experiencing burnout. You might have difficulty concentrating. I know I was going through a very stressful time at work one time, and I felt like I couldn't learn anything new. I kept getting information, and I felt like I was already saturated, that I couldn't absorb it. And a lot of times, if you're thinking about a million different things, or you're noticing that you're making dumb mistakes or missing little details, that may be a sign of burnout. If you're having trouble sleeping, if the quality of your sleep isn't good, if you're waking up in the middle of the night and can't go back to sleep, if you can't fall asleep in the beginning of the night, or if you're just sleeping fitfully, a lot of waking up, that could be a sign of burnout. And then, of course, unhealthy coping strategies. If you are drinking, doing illicit drugs, abusing prescription medication, in other words, taking it more than it's prescribed, if it's something that helps your mood or something like that. If you're overeating or not eating enough, if you're engaging in any kind of risky behavior, that may be a sign of burnout. You're looking for some kind of distraction. If you're spending hours and hours and hours on the internet or something like that, all of these are signs that you might be coping in a not very healthy way.
I want to make mention of another
Sure.
thing. Talked about difficulty sleeping. I know from past experiences when we're so overwhelmed with things going on, and we hold it all in our head. And then we go to bed at night, and it's all in our head, and it goes through our head 150 times until now it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and you can't get out of your head. I always tell people, get a pad of paper, write your thoughts down, even if it's not journaling, just stuff that you need to do so you can forget about it. You're not going to worry about forgetting because it's on the paper. That's simple. And I don't mean sticky notes all over the house, because I would lose them, they'd fall off. Get one pad of paper, one booklet to write these things down. You shut it at nighttime and get a good night's sleep. So simple. So simple.
So what if you are experiencing signs of burnout or feel like that might apply to you? What are some of the things that you need to do to get help? First of all, just recognizing that we're not completely independent, that you're not a superwoman or a superman, and that you might need some support from someone else. That's the first step. What they say in the 12-step programs is the first step is admitting that you have a problem, right? Then you would go on to develop, another thing that you can do is start to figure out how you can outsource some of the things that are weighing on you. I've talked about that can-do list that you can make, a list of all the things that the little tedious jobs or things that get in the way or things that aren't getting done. Maybe when you have your cup of coffee in the morning and you're looking out the window and you see that gutter is drooping a little bit, and you look at it every day, and every day that you're looking at that thing that you mean to get to and you can't do it, it gets on your nerves. When somebody comes and says, "Is there anything I can do for help?" hopefully the gutter is on your can-do list. And like I said previously, I would just present the list to them and let people pick, because they're going to be more willing to do something if they get to have some control over how involved they get. Sometimes people might just be saying it, is there anything I can do to help? Because they don't know what else to say. But when you give somebody something constructive to do, it makes them feel good. They know what their own time budget is, and then they may continue to come back, or what can I do next, or something like that.
Don't be afraid to ask. Mm-hmm. It's very important.
If you have the ability to hire temporary help, we certainly would encourage you to do that. You've heard us talk about the end-of-life doulas, who are people who, you pay out of pocket unless it's a volunteer organization. Don't forget that Middlesex Health, if you're affiliated with our hospice, if your loved one is affiliated with our hospice program, we have the volunteer doulas who will get involved and help to give you some support. You call these doulas up and you say, well, what is it that you can do? This is what's bothering me, or this is what I'm having trouble with. Have that conversation with them, and if it seems like what they can provide for you matches up with what you need, then you can make an arrangement. Even if it's just, a few hours a week, that's a few hours that you're getting back that you didn't have before. Pace yourself. That's something that you hear all the time when you're taking care of somebody. People say, oh, you gotta slow down. You gotta pace yourself. What does that even mean? Sometimes people say to you, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Okay, but where are the goalposts here? Where are the guideposts here? How do I pace myself? We're going to give you a couple of tips on that, on maintaining your relationships, on creating a safe environment to prevent aggravations or nuisances or really real crises that are going to affect your ability as a caregiver. Understanding the illness trajectory is very important, because if you're running a race, you want to know where the finish line is so that you know when you need to kick into high gear, right? We're going to talk a little bit about anticipatory grief, and we're going to talk about life after loss, because at some point a lot of these relationships do end in death. So maintaining relationships, first of all, one of the most important things that you can do for yourself as a caregiver is to make sure that the ties that you have, the social ties, the relatives, the friends, church friends, your book group, whoever are the people who kind of keep you grounded, reach out to these people and explain to them, I may not be available in the way I used to be, but I don't want to lose touch with you. And think about what kind of contact you want to have with those people. It's also the perfect time to shed the people in your life who aren't really doing you any favors. If you don't have time for people, if you didn't feel like you had time for people when you weren't a caregiver, you really don't have time for them when you've got this additional burden on you. So if you don't, if you've got a cousin who wants to call and talk to you for 3 hours, you need to set some boundaries and say, I can't have these Sunday evening conversations anymore, but hey, how about if you write me a letter and or send me an email or something with all the things that you would tell me. That way you can open up that email when you have the time, if you have the time and really want to do that, but that person feels like they're still maintaining that relationship. I have some really wonderful friends who we can text each other just little bursts throughout the day. It doesn't have to have a narrative arc or anything like that. Somebody says, oh, my son got into UConn Law School, and we all celebrate, say yay, and everything like that. And that's where the conversation ends. But we touch base with each other a couple of times a week, at least that way, and it feels good to know that those, even though we all have busy lives, that we're still touching base. So think about the ways that you can keep in touch with people that's not going to be a burden on you. And if you're an introvert, you don't have the bandwidth a lot of times to be able to maintain those relationships, because you're being an extrovert with your loved one now. And so that might be sapping all your energy, but it does still help to find a way to stay connected with people, because those people are going to be your support throughout this journey. Try to accept invitations when you can. So these next two kind of go together. We want you to try to accept invitations when you can, even though you say, oh, I really don't feel like I'm going to want to go out to lunch on Sunday, but my girlfriend's offering to have her teenager or daughter in nursing school come and stay with my loved one so that she can take me out. Say yes. Usually on those things, it's like going to the gym. You know how you never feel like you want to go to the gym, but then after you've gone to the gym, you feel really good about it? Just try to make that little extra effort to keep those kind of social engagements. But at the same time, if your friends are good friends, they'll understand if you have to kind of back out at the last minute. So even when you accept an invitation, you can offer that caveat. Sherry had a great idea that, if it's important to you to go to see your grandson's basketball game, but you know that the burden of spending 2 hours sitting there, the whole time you're going to be thinking, I got to get home, I got to get home, I got to get home. Why not just show up at halftime and, spend an hour or something?
Something's better than nothing.
Yep. So set the rules, but be flexible. One thing that you also want to do is try to prevent problems as much as possible. And so there's, healthcare is full of little mnemonics. So we have the 5 mnemonics. The 5 Ps is a mnemonic that we use all the time when we're taking care of people. And the 5 Ps are, hope I can remember.
Come on, Nurse Sue.
Position, potty, personal belongings, sorry, gotta look at my notes. I was doing so well. Okay, position, personal belongings, pain, potty, and prevention. So what do I mean by those things? For position, when you have your loved one at home and you're going to be leaving the room, or you put them to bed or whatever, take that extra minute to make sure that they're in a comfortable position. I always tell nursing students when we are teaching nursing students, just try to imagine that your body's in the same position as that person's body. And when nurses learn that trick to say, well, would my arm be comfortable if it's like that? Or, then you know that they're not in a good position. Position them so that they seem comfortable, they're not wriggling around. Ask them if they can answer you, or do you feel comfortable? Because what happens if somebody's not comfortable as soon as you leave the room? What's that? They call you, or they don't call you, and then they wind up on the floor, right? And so falls are a big part of caring for somebody who's seriously ill. And so this is one way that you can, try to avoid falls, is make sure the person's comfortable before you leave them. Pain is also a big thing. People who have dementia use much less pain medication, and I'm talking about just like Tylenol and things like that. And sometimes in the nursing, when I used to work in the nursing home, I worked on a dementia special care unit, and we would have patients who would be yelling or banging or calling out or agitated, and we would just give them a scheduled Tylenol twice a day, and the behavior went away because they had no other way to tell you that they were in pain. So you can avoid a lot of problems and a lot of that aggravation. It's hard to be with somebody who's agitated all day. The more that they're agitated, the more that you get agitated and short and unhappy. So pain is a big one, and if your loved one is not able to communicate what's going on with them, then give it a shot. See what happens when you give them a Tylenol or something like that. Potty, people get agitated when they have to go to the bathroom. So, try before if you want to steal, a half an hour for yourself and sit somebody down in front of the news if they like to watch the news or something like that, take them to the bathroom or give them the urinal, whatever you need to do before that, so that you're buying yourself that half hour of not getting called and interrupted. And you want to also make sure that all their personal belongings that they like are within reach. The clicker, eyeglasses, a beverage if they always have a cup of coffee or a glass of water or something like that. Anything that they might try to get on their own, just have it all in reach and make sure that it's in a safe spot for them.
I had mentioned something, it just reminded me of something.
Yeah.
I'd love to see nurses who go into a room, and this is at the hospital because that's where I work, but they'll say to the patient, okay, you've got this here, what else can I do for you right now? And they're like, I think I've got everything. Okay, now that nurse has another maybe 15, 20 minutes to do some charting or do whatever she wanted to do. Maybe sit down and have a cup of coffee. If you being the nurse is at home, you have that little bit of time. But making sure they're all set. You're good right now? Okay. You might get a little extra time in, but it's something to be mindful of, And not just, okay, here's this and go, and then in 5 minutes they're going to want something else. Just be mindful of how do we organize their place.
Yep.
Yep.
And then, of course, prevention, falls prevention.
Reach.
If you do have your loved one on the hospice program, we usually have the occupational therapist come in, usually in the beginning and periodically throughout if there's a functional decline. And they are amazing. They walk in, they say, you know what, that rug's got to go, or he has the wrong kind of walker, or you just need a raised toilet seat, or can we put that recliner up on blocks? We'll order a certain type of durable medical equipment. They have an eye for the things that are going to prevent the fall before it happens. So again, therapies are involved in hospice. It's just that we're not doing that really aggressive physical therapy or, trying to get them back to a restored level of care.
I think it just reminded me of something too. So oftentimes they're in hospice and in palliative care, social workers get involved. I cannot tell you how many times a family member will say to me, when I'm doing a consult in Sue as well, we don't need social worker. I don't have any problems. It's not about that. It's about making sure that they're knowing that the support is there, even helping figure out like how to have, what would you think of some things that they do as far as?
Well, a social worker, anticipates what the decline is going to be, and so you might not realize that you're going to need somebody around the clock with this person pretty soon.
Resources. They're a great one
Yep.
for resources, whether it be funeral homes or doctors or groups that family can go to for support, that type of thing. That's what they're there for.
Are you using all the resources that are out there in the community for you? And then I've shown you that slide every other week that you've been here about the different illness trajectories, but that's very important too. Like I said, if you're running a race, you need to know where the finish line is so you know how to parcel out your energy so that you can get to the finish line safely and as unscathed as possible, right? So understanding the disease trajectory is very important, but in healthcare, it's amazing how often, you keep taking somebody to the doctor and they're looking at the problem right in front of them, but nobody's kind of stepping back and looking at the big picture. If you or someone you know has a serious illness and you would like to have some sense of where you are in the scheme of things, the palliative team has a lot of different tools based on the type of illness you have and based on experience and what we know about the course that these things usually take, where you are in that trajectory. And so that's one of the most gratifying parts of my job, is just to be able to talk to people and let them, ask them questions. And as they're talking, they start to get a sense of where they are. It kind of moors them, in the disease trajectory so that they understand, okay, we've got a lot of time, we maybe don't have very much time, maybe it's time to call in the backup resources, that kind of thing. Okay.
Okay. So now we're going to talk a little about anticipatory grief. And the word anticipatory does not mean looking forward to a pleasant or joyous celebration. Anticipatory grief is the distress a person may feel in the days, months, or even years before the death of a loved one. So, having it to envision life without that person, you would thought they were always going to be there. Now we're at that point in time where, I remember my 97-year-old grandmother, Babci. She was never going to die. I think she was on the last video, yes.
Okay.
She was going to be with us forever. And all of a sudden, now we have to really think about, wow, this woman is starting to fail. What is life going to be without her? That's anticipating what's going to happen soon. And there's also the loss of dreams that you might have had with that loved one, maybe going on vacation, those vacations you planned. Those are important things to think about as far as our lives. You want to take a look at the big picture and understand that this moment right now is so important, that what the time you do have left with your loved one, making it the best it can be while they're still with us. As well It's hard to think about these things, but take the time to think about them and talk to them about it if they're able to converse with you. I think it's very important. You might be looking forward to, weddings down the line with a child getting married or a grandchild and that dance. And now you're probably not going to be able to do that with your loved one because chances are they won't be able to do that. These are things that anticipatory grief can cause a lot of stress for us. Finances, that's another thing. What's it going to be when they're no longer here? How am I going to pay the bills? Maybe, depending on the age of your loved one. I recently had a situation back about a couple months ago, I guess, and it was a great granddaughter whose grandfather lived with her, and he was already in his early 90s. They lived in a house along with her fiance and her 3-year-old child. Well, Grandpa helped pay her half of everything. Now Grandpa is starting to fail, and we're trying to get him onto the hospice program. And she said, I can't take care of him at home. There's no way I can do this. Okay, so now we have to look at a nursing home for him. Okay, but now a nursing home costs between $7,000 and maybe $6,000 and $12,000 a month, which would really deplete what he had in his savings that was paying for the house and the bills. She was in complete denial and shock that this was going to happen, that they had to pay out of pocket because all he had was Medicare. He had enough of resources that Medicare would only kick in for hospice at the facility, but not room and board. So that was an out-of-pocket expense. So this was very stressful for her. Long term, she ended up taking him home where they brought in the hospital equipment, and he ended up dying at home with her, which was hopefully a little bit better than the financial burden it would have cost for her to bring him to the nursing home. And then we also have, roles are changing with anticipatory grief. That thought of, okay, who's going to now maybe cut the lawn? Who's going to make dinner? Depending on where we are in this, relationship. Those are things that we don't ever really think about until, oh my goodness, here it is. My mom, she never cut the grass before. To start a lawnmower or to know how to start the wheel horse that's in the shed, that she's got to get out of the shed, she was just beside herself. She lives in Rhode Island. We live in Connecticut. And that was like, okay, Mom, maybe let's look at an electric lawnmower. And she says it's her exercise now. So, but it's a battery that she has to plug in. But these are the things that we don't think about, and we do think about them, anticipating, something occurring soon, most likely, months or possibly years when someone's really ill. These are things we need to start thinking about. There's also, the anticipating services later on for your loved one. You want to stop and think, if your loved one is still able to talk about what their wishes are, what a great time to sit down and really talk about, what readings would you want at your service? Who would you want us to invite? Who would you want us not to invite? What music would you want played? What are those, Amazing Grace.
Amazing Grace, yeah.
My grandmother, Bobchi, wanted Louis Zayas, a gentleman who used to work for my husband who sounded like Frank Sinatra, to sing Amazing Grace at her funeral. We were all like, oh my God, but that was her wish. And it came true because we knew what she wanted, which was great. So these are the things we always need to, keep in mind and not necessarily burden ourselves, but try to make it an easy transition when the time does come.
Share with that story that you were telling about the granddaughter. If I remember correctly, the granddaughter actually was very successful at caring for him as well.
Yes.
And
We were able to teach her how to care for him, and
yeah. When your loved one is in the hospital and has had a big functional decline, the hospital has a responsibility to make sure that they're going home to a safe living situation. They have the physical therapist, maybe the occupational therapist, the speech therapist come in and evaluate and make recommendations about how much care they're going to need at home. Of course, they're going to err on the side of caution And so a lot of times when we're talking to people about hospice and, they feel like they're going to have to put their loved one in a nursing home, it's because they're thinking about taking care of this person with this new functional decline without any support at all. So sometimes if we're able to talk to them about the hospice team and what they bring to the table and how we're going to help work with them and train them to be able to take care of the person, they're going to have that 24-hour nurse on call and things like that. A lot of times at that point they're willing to give it a shot and bring their loved one home. And I think that that's one of the great things about working for hospice. The other thing I always tell people is, if the hospital's telling you you're going to need around-the-clock care, see if you can put it in place at least for 2 weeks. Sometimes families even kind of cobble together a schedule so that different children are taking different shifts or whatever. I said, and I'll say, that 2 weeks is going to buy you some time to see what his needs really are, because there are times when you can back off of the 24-hour caregiver if the patient is, lucid, or, you've got other, like Life Alert and things like that. And, sometimes the team will tell you about solutions that other families have found that you hadn't thought about. During COVID, we had a lot of families who had college students who weren't going to college. They were doing it all online. So they would move in with grandpa or grandma while they were on hospice, and there was somebody in the house, but they could continue to do their work and everything like that. It was a great solution.
Then, of course, there's that after the loss, life after loss, and dealing with that. Maintaining your relationships is so important, whether that would be with friends, family, asking, maybe, going out once in a while. You need to regroup to be able to enjoy those things that you used to do. Another thing, too, I always tell people, when we mentioned this before, there's so many details that factor in, when losing someone. Again, keep that pad of paper, make that list. And when somebody says, hey, what can I do for you? Like we mentioned, here you go, you take a look at it, this is what I have to do. It's so important. And you need to, hold on, you need to grieve. Sometimes people don't take time to grieve. They'll, I say, go around it, up over it, underneath it, but not through it. If you don't take that time, it's going to bite you in the butt later on, trust me. It just is. And it's okay to cry. Don't be afraid to cry. Men especially, for some reason, you're not supposed to cry. No, cry. It feels good. It's a release. It's a release of that energy that's, and it might be every day. I have a few old gentlemen that we follow through bereavement, and we talk to them from week to week. Share, I've just been crying, and I keep crying, it's okay. And all of a sudden, you watch this progression as time goes by, and the calls that we make, and things get better, and that grief it gets easier. It doesn't change, life changes. Your life is different now, it's not gonna stay the same, but we work through that. And I think one of the most important things is when the time does come, you can sit back and find meaning in that life that you had with your loved one, no matter who it is. There's meaning there. Sometimes it takes a little bit of digging to find what it is, as time passes in the beginning stages. But when those couple years pass by, you realize, wow, this is the reason why, or this is why things went the way they did, It's important. It's important. There's a great book by David Kessler, which is called Finding Meaning, The 6 Stages of Grief, the 6th stage of grief. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who has the first 5 stages of grief. Well, he has a 6th. It's a really good book. There's a young woman, she's in her 40s, getting closer to late, me neither, late 40s, who was married to her husband since they were 18. He was considerably older than her. And she showed up for our holiday gathering that we have for our bereavement, our families that we have at the Cancer Center every year. And she walked in, I'd never met her before, and she sat down, and you could just tell she was not in a good place. She had just lost her husband, it's the holidays, et cetera, et cetera. She started coming to bereavement groups, and we talked, and we processed. And she probably said the same story over and over again for months. It's been 3 years. Believe it or not, right now, I just talked to her last week, because she'll be facilitating one of our bereavement groups soon. She's going through training right now. And she says, when I look back at this journey, it's been an incredible journey. Would I want to do it again? Probably not. But what she's learned and how she's grown herself. She's now going back to school to become a caregiver. She's thinking about social work. And to me, I'm just so proud of her, and it's so neat to watch some of these people and how they progress through life. There was a gentleman, this goes back quite a few years ago. I can't remember if I mentioned this. I mentioned him before in some of my talks, but had 2 little children. Wife is very young. She passes. He goes home. He's got to take these 2 little kids with him home to an empty house. Mom's not there anymore. His wife's not there anymore. We have our young widow and widows group that we have at the hospital, bereavement group. And he showed up one night, and I knew who he was, and I said to him, Steve, how long has it been? And he said to me, 6 years. I'm like, I said, what brings you tonight? And he said, I never took the time to grieve. I'm like, wow. Since then, he's remarried and has another baby. But he needed to show up. He needed to process. And I think I was just so happy for him that he was able to set that time aside and do this. It was amazing.
I think we're running
Okay.
close to the end of the hour.
Wow.
So the point of the next couple of slides is that we just want you to remember to take time for yourself every day, as you know, throughout your caregiving. Set yourself a goal in the morning. I'm going to do this one thing, and it could be a very small thing, but do at least one thing for yourself. It could be something fun. It could be something healthful, like drinking the water. It could be just that gutter that you wanted to tack up, or the junk drawer that's overflowing that you want to clean out. It'll give you such a feeling of accomplishment if you do something that's not related to your caregiving duties. So I think we should turn and open it up for questions. Sure. We do have a little video there that if you give us on the evaluation, you give us your email address, we're going to send you out that list of resources. There's a very nice exercise that you can do to kind of anchor yourself.
Cleanse and anchor yourself, and yes.
Any questions? Does anyone have any questions? I always forget to.
It's amazing how quickly an hour goes by.
Yeah. Anyone? Well, I never remember to thank Pastor Doug and Alex, but we presented them with some technical challenges today, and they rose to the occasion beautifully, and we really are so appreciative of your hospitality and for everybody showing up every week. This has been really very rewarding for me. Don't forget to come next week, if you, especially if you know of someone who is a caregiver for a person who has dementia, or someone who might themselves be diagnosed with early dementia. We would love to have you come to our presentation next week and talk about the particular caregiving challenges that presents.
Is that the last one, Sue? Is that the last presentation?
And that's the last one, I think. Yep. Yep.
Oh.
Yeah. And think about who do you know who needs this information, because we can have that conversation with them on the phone. Give them our card, and I'm glad to talk to anybody. Okay? Thank you all so much
Thank you,
for
everyone.
coming. I appreciate it. Thank you.